Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Honest Youth Pastor YouTube channel, the channel that helps believers use biblical discernment in all aspects of life. Tonight, we're going to be talking about, well, actually, we're not talking about, we have somebody on tonight. David Ainsworth is going to be on with us tonight. He was a pastor briefly within the United Methodist Church. As you may or may not know, the United Methodist Church is going through quite a split over a few different issues, and I'm sure he'll be kind of filling us in on the things that he witnessed and he saw in his time at one of the churches he was at that was United Methodist as well. So we're going to jump right into it, but before we do, just make sure that if you like this kind of content, the live streams that we do, that you go ahead and leave a like, a comment perhaps, or even a share. All of those things, if I'm not told you, all of those things feed the monster that is the algorithm. So thank you for that. So let's go ahead. We're going to pop over. We have Josh on here tonight, as well as David. We're missing Matt. We miss Matt, but we do have Josh here and David as well. David Ainsworth, how are you doing, sir?
I'm good, guys. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for being on. Appreciate it. Just so you guys know kind of how I me and David communicated. I made a meme, as I often do, and it was about the United Methodist Church. You can go look it up. It was actually the one, the Black Panther one, where it goes, "We don't do that here," and it was talking about the drag queen that was in one of the United Methodist churches. Now, to be clear, not every United Methodist church brings drag queens in, but an alarming rate of them do apparently. And I made a meme about that. And then David actually made a comment on there about how he had actually had to leave his job at the United Methodist Church over something similar to that. So I reached out to David, and he agreed to come on and kind of talk about his time there. And the reason I wanted to talk to David and kind of get his story was because a lot of us have heard about, the things going on in the United Methodist Church. And to be clear, David tonight is obviously going to tell us just about his experience, and we don't want to, make the general assumption it's everybody's experience. But a lot of us have heard about it, but we don't necessarily have anybody that has been through it or is going through it. And a lot of it's hearsay and that sort of thing. So I wanted to bring him on because I'm interested. My denomination is a sister denomination to the Methodist Church. I'm in the Wesleyan Church. And so I thought, hey, I know a little bit about it, but I wanted to talk to David about it, get his side of the story, see what he went through, just to sort of hopefully give you guys a window into this as well. One window to kind of what's going on, what's going down. So David, do you want to just give us sort of an intro to who you are, sort of a short sort of intro to where you got to a United Methodist Church, and then if you could kind of walk us through a little bit about the process that actually led to you kind of having to leave the church and what kind of brought about that.
Yeah, for sure. So my name is David Ainsworth. I've been in ministry full-time vocationally for the most part since about 2012. So about 10 years now. I served on the mission field in Vancouver, Canada, with a church plant there. I've done primarily student ministry in the years past. About just over a year ago or so, I started communication with a United Methodist Church. I grew up Baptist. Baptist is my background. I'm licensed and ordained in the Baptist Church. Educated through them and that kind of thing. But a little over a year ago, I started talking to the Methodist Church, a local congregation here, about coming on as their executive pastor. And so I took on that role, basically meaning that I would take over all the day-to-day operations of the church, except for preaching and congregational care and that kind of thing. So my plate was, keeping the air conditioner running and keeping the lights on and making sure that everything's taken care of and that sort of thing. I immediately kind of went from that role to our pastor took a sabbatical, so I took a more active role in worship and all those things for a little bit of time. And so I didn't know a lot about the Methodist Church when I first got to work in there. I mean, I'd heard stories kind of like what you're saying about the Methodist Church and the pending split and the straying from Scripture and things like that. But I didn't get the feeling that it was a big deal at that local congregation. And I will say, to kind of echo what you said, it's not every Methodist church is like that. I would say that even the congregation that I left a month or so ago really isn't like that right now. But the problem is that you can see what's coming on the horizon, and if churches don't make the choice to make a decision now, it's going to be on their doorstep before they realize it. And so that's kind of where that's how I got to Diamond Head. Great little church. Don't have any problems with the church people there. It was much a bigger picture idea for me. So,
Gotcha. So, what at your time there, like you said, you were there for a little bit over a year. Clearly, you come from you said, like you said, a different background in that regard. But as you sort of started doing ministry there, what were some of the signs that you saw that ended up, that kind of led to this in your head going, I might have to exit here because there's just some things going on. Because for example, I've talked to some pastors, youth pastors. There was a guy not too long ago that DM'd us and he's like, hey, I was super excited. I interviewed, I got this job at this church, and now they're preaching things that I'm like, what in the world? And so I obviously your experience is not identical, but it's sort of similar to where you're like, oh, wow, okay, these are the things that are going on here. So what were some of those kind of, I don't know, points in time in that last year that you were like, I don't think I can stay here?
Yeah. Okay. So as I mentioned, our pastor, when I first got there, he took a sabbatical right after I arrived, and that kind of allowed me to kind of see a little bit further into things, and not only see further into things, but actually to go and look for myself at certain things. And so when the pastor came back and we spent a few months together, at the beginning of the summer, he requested to be transferred, which in the Methodist Church is not unusual. He requested to be transferred, and he was granted that request. He left us in the month of June. I had been on a vacation when he announced his leaving, and when I came back, literally the first day I was back in the office, I had two people come to me, and with the simple question of this: are we going to talk about this now? We know there's issues. It's an elephant that's been in the room. We haven't talked about it. We've been told we're not going to talk about it until we have to talk about it, but we need to talk about it now. Are we willing to do the hard things now? And being in my executive pastor role that I was in, I was not an employee of the Methodist Church. I was an employee of that church, which allowed me a little bit more freedom and flexibility to kind of bring up some of these ideas to certain people and say, I think the church needs to be informed so that the church can make a decision. Because I think the largest, and I don't say this and mean this, I think the largest problem in the Methodist Church right now, for many congregations, is just ignorance. They don't realize what people are doing that's attached to the name of the church that they go to. And so I think that's the biggest problem we have right now. And so back in June, we began the process of, okay, we're going to have these conversations. Are we going to allow our church to have these conversations? And as admin council, who makes the choices and directs the church and tries to be the discernment group for what God wants the church to do, we decided as a group we're not going to shy away from these conversations anymore. They're going to happen. We're not going to tell the church which direction to go, but we're going to let them happen. And at that point, when we started that conversation, human sexuality was the biggest issue. Okay, that was the elephant in the room. Many arguments on both sides of that, even inside our church, a local, if there is such thing as a Bible Belt, Mississippi's probably the buckle of that. And I mean, very conservative area for the most part. But we were willing to have that conversation and willing to let both sides talk, and then we could decide. So we didn't necessarily set out on a path, regardless of what many people might think. We didn't set out on a path that we're going to lead our church to disaffiliation. There is a disaffiliation process, and we'll go into that in a little bit. But we didn't go out saying we want to disaffiliate. We went out there going, we want to have these conversations. We want to educate people and inform them so that this church can make the best decision. And then after that decision is made, those of us that may not agree, then you can decide to move along. Or vice versa. If this church says we're going to put our foot in the ground and we're not going to do these things anymore, we're not going to support the groups that do, then we can move on. Whichever side has to decide at that point if we're going to be able to maintain being a church family anymore. June 24th changed everything. June 24th, if you know politics and you know what happened around the country on that day, that was the very day that the Supreme Court handed down the decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. And many people celebrated that day. That was a great day for life, for the value of life. And some people didn't necessarily have the same appreciation for that day. One of those groups of people being the Council of Bishops for the United Methodist Church. The United Methodist Church it's a very, being Wesleyan, you kind of know this, it's a very big body of people, a lot of government in that. And so they live by a book of discipline. It's much like the U.S. Constitution. It's paragraph this and paragraph that and paragraph this. And so basically the Secretary of State for the President, which is the Council of Bishops, the Secretary for the Council, released a statement on June 24th. And in that statement, this is actually what was said. I'm not going to read all of it to you, but the line that stuck out was that we, meaning the United Methodist Church, we lament the decision of the U.S. Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade. That press release is online. You can go look it up yourself. It's easy to find. But when you put the word lament about the decision that was made by our Supreme Court, that kind of draws the line about where you're standing on things. And they go on to say that abortion is health care and blah, 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 blah. And they defend the, 1% or so of the issues that may be, aligned with abortion, that the health of the mother and rape and incest and all that kind of stuff. But for me, that was a point of no return. And for others in our church, it was the same way. I have an 8-year-old little girl that was adopted. I adopted her. We've had her since moment one when she came onto the planet. But her birth grandmother wanted her aborted. And she made that very known. And luckily, we live in a state that kind of health care is not very readily available. And God intervened and allowed us to have my little girl. And I swore to her the very first time I held her in the hospital that I would always protect her and I would always stand up for her. And and at that point, the wheels started in my head of, am I really doing what I say I'm doing if I choose a paycheck over my standards and my morals and my convictions to maintain my status as an employee of this church? Or do I need to be a Christ follower and be a good daddy and actually say what I'm going to do, or do what I'm going to say, excuse me. So the wheels started there. Again, we were without a pastor for a short period of time, which in a United Methodist Church is a unicorn. Man, that doesn't happen. We were without a pastor for a few months. And what that allowed us to do is we had the freedom to openly talk about things without the pressure of a United Methodist employee being there telling us what we're going to do. The month of June came along. We had these conversations. I made it very clear in one of our admin council meetings that I would not, long term, I would not be an employee of this church if this church continued to align itself with the United Methodist Church. I wouldn't do it. July came along. We kept the conversations going. The abortion thing was a big deal. There were things in our church. People were talking on all sides of this. It was kind of getting to a point where it was just a powder keg kind of thing. July happened. We decided as an admin council at the end of July, we're going to inform our church about what's happening. We're going to give them an opportunity to hear both sides of things as best we could. And we're going to fill them in on what's happening in the United Methodist Church. Again, not from the point of disaffiliation, not from the point of we're going down that road. We're just telling you these are the issues. We presented the Book of Discipline does speak out wholeheartedly against homosexuality. It does. It tells you what can and cannot happen in regards to that. The Book of Discipline is very clear on the value of life and abortion, things like that. So these are not issues that aren't there and aren't answered in the Book of Discipline. These are issues that are just being chosen to be ignored by certain congregations in certain parts of the country because it doesn't get them what they want, which is just an all-inclusive, anybody and everybody can come. We can have Miss Pentecost come and dress up as a drag queen and preach to our children and lead children's sermons, lead our church on Sunday mornings if we talk out against these things. And so I will say the Book of Discipline is clear. The problem is there's no enforcement. There's no enforcement across the table at any level of the United Methodist Church that's keeping these things like actually supposed to happen. The Book of Discipline's clear. Now, what they want to change is the verbiage to allow all these things to change. That's what they want. That's what they want to happen in 24. We had the conversations. Again, we have no pastor. The agreement we had with our district superintendent was, you got David there. I can fill the preaching roles. I can find people to come in and preach. I can find people to come in and do communion. I can preach when necessary. Let's come back to the table in September and talk about a pastor. So we were in the process of, okay, we're going to educate. So in the month of August, the second week of August, we had 2 days of meetings, 4 opportunities for our church to come and listen. We showed videos by Rob Renfro. I don't know if you've watched those videos. He has a series of videos out kind of talking about the Methodist Church. If you don't know about what's going on, I would encourage you to look it up on YouTube. They've got thousands and thousands of views. He's a pastor out of the Houston area. And biggest church in Texas is the one he's affiliated with. And so we showed these videos. We try, like I said, we showed them the book of discipline, but we showed them where it's not being enforced. 2 days, 4 meetings, 2 lunches, 2 dinners. I presented the facts at those meetings. I tried to stay as central as I could on them, as passionate as I was about most of them. I didn't let that show, or at least I tried not to. We had those meetings on Wednesday and Thursday of that week. Our goal was, we want to get feedback from the church, and we want to let the church decide what to do next. They may hear everything we just said, and they may go, we hear you, but we don't want to make a change. And if that's what they had decided, again, people would have left. Some people would have stayed, but at least we would know. We would know that we did our best to inform the church. Again, that was a Wednesday and a Thursday. To a person, everybody that attended those meetings, and especially our leadership team that was there, I mean, we had lines of people after each one of them waiting to speak to somebody, whether it was myself, the chairman of the admin, the chairman of SPRC, whoever it may be. There were people ready to say, we need to do something right now. Like, and that's all we heard. Like, we never heard a person go, no, this is dumb. Y'all are barking up the wrong tree. Cut this out. Let's just go back to everything the way it was. Nobody told us that. And if they had, we would have listened. Like, I wholeheartedly mean that. We would have listened. We set out from the very beginning to be in a posture of, we want to do what God wants to do. We want to let our church decide it, because this is a church decision. It's not a staff decision. It's not an SPRC decision or an admin council or anything like that. This is a church decision. And that's the posture we took all along, and that's the one we maintained. Even to this day, the people that are still there are still maintaining that posture. We called our district superintendent on Friday, and we said, hey, we want to loop you into this. We had 2 days of meetings. The church feels like we're probably going to keep going down this road of possible disaffiliation. Again, at that point, it was still possible. But we want to let you know, because we're following the protocol. We're going to call you and tell you what's going on so that you can prepare. You can give us the numbers, and you can give us all the things that if we do disaffiliate, this is what it's going to cost. This is what it looks like. All of those things. We had that conversation on Friday. Again, this is the 2nd week of August. I had a baby on the way. My baby was born on August 24th. So there was lots going on at the time. This is the 2nd week of August. School had just started here. Many moving parts just in the world around us at that point. So Friday we talked to the district superintendent. He's emailing back and forth, so we know he's hearing what we're saying. Like, we're not just sending blind emails and hope he gets them before Monday. Monday rolls along. Again, we have no pastor at this time. The plan was, we'll come back to the table in September. Monday morning, the following week rolls along, and our SPRC chairman gets a call. Hey man, I want to come meet with you either today or tomorrow, because I got a pastor I want to place at the church. And we were just like, wait, what? Yeah, I got a pastor I want to put in the church now. And it's like, did you not hear what we just told you? Because he was part of the conversation. Did you not just hear what we told you on Friday? Like, this church is in a season of, okay, we want to get out. We want to see what it's going to take to get out of this, probably. Well, yeah, I understand all that, but you're Methodist until you're not Methodist anymore. And so for some of us, that was just like, okay, we're not playing with the same deck of cards here. Like, they have the power to do far more than we can do. We could fight a placement, but we can only fight it for so long and for so far. We can fight a lot of things, but his statement of, you're Methodist until you're not Methodist, is true. That's exactly what we are, because that building is not ours. Quite frankly, the pastor that comes in is not ours. They haven't spent $1 on the campus of that church, but they own every staple in the building, according to the book of discipline, which is crazy to me as a growing up Baptist and growing up with total autonomy of a church. And hey, if I build it, it's mine. If I put the shingle on the roof, that's my shingle. That's not how it is in the Methodist church. Some people don't realize that. Most of our church didn't realize that. We had many people raise their hand and go, wait a second, we don't own our building? No, we don't own this building. They don't own the chair you're sitting in. Even though they've never spent a dime, because of the trust clause, they own everything. And so at that point, we realized we're not playing on, we don't, this is not a level playing field. As I said, for me, I had a lot going on in my life at the time. My baby was on the way, and there was a meeting that happened that I wasn't present for, but I was on the phone for. And I called into the meeting. I asked a few questions during the meeting. I frustrated him to the point where the district superintendent called me the phone in the middle of the table and said, I'm not going to talk to the phone in the middle of the table anymore. And so that's when David shut up, and David sat back and said, okay, I understand what's happening around here. Long story short, that the pastor that he recommended gets placed in there. Not a bad guy. Don't have anything against him, but he is there to slow the process down, whether he realizes it or not. He is there to slow the process down or to stop the process of disaffiliation. The church has had the meeting with the state treasurer and with the local guy again to tell them what the cost would be if that church chooses to disaffiliate. Now, this is not a big church. This is a church of, just over 100 on a good Sunday, because after COVID, it's kind of just been broken apart and messy and not what it should be. But this is not a big church, not a big building, not a huge facility. And for just that small local congregation, they want $153,000. Now that number could go up by the time the actual check gets cut, because you have to pay the pension, it's all about pension, and we'll go on that in a second. But you have to pay those numbers until you actually disaffiliate. So it's 153. That was 153 in September. That goes up every month. So that number gets a little bit higher. It could possibly go down if everything changes in the stock market or whatever. But if we had left that day, which you couldn't, it would have been $153,000. So quite a large number for a church that, doesn't have a lot of, huge high rollers as far as members go and things like that. Could it have been done? Yeah, it absolutely could have been done. But they're putting so many hurdles in the place for so many churches. And that's what's so frustrating for me is I've done so much research on this issue, and I literally went back before our meetings, and I went back and looked. I watched General Conference 19, which is where they put some of these escape clauses in for the churches and things like that. And it's painful to watch all those things. But what I have gleaned from that is just how, just like they're not enforcing the book of discipline, there's no cut and dry, this is what it's going to take to get out. And my opinion is that for the most part, the United Methodist Church is trying to hurt. They're aiming to hurt local congregations. They're trying to hurt them into staying, and trying to turn them back into good little Methodist churches. Even if they've gone off and said we don't believe in what y'all are telling us anymore, they still want to try to do everything they can till the very last minute to get their churches to bow down and to stay United Methodist. And so, for me personally, it got to the point where I realized this church was heading for a bad split. Like this church was either going to, what I told the new pastor when he came in, is that probably come January, you're either going to have maybe 60% of the people that are here will stay. You may go down, you might lose as much as 70% of the people. They may be going off to other bodies and worshiping somewhere else. So the end is it's not like it's way off. The end is right here for a lot of churches. And the problem is, like in this particular situation, we already know, we were told that even if we say we want to disaffiliate tomorrow, that it wouldn't be until February or March until we get a chance to vote and put that in stone. And then it wouldn't be until next summer for that to become final. That's just in Mississippi. Other states are making it much easier. Other states are having multiple conferences before the end of this year to go ahead and let those churches get out, let them go do what they want to do, start a new year as a new church and things like that. It's very much it's very frustrating in the sense that what factors are leading to churches leaving, and what they're going to owe and that sort of thing, but you don't know what our number. There's no basis for our number. Like our number, we could have a sister church right next to ours with the same exact facility, the same exact amount of people, and that kind of thing, and their number could be higher or lower than ours, and there's no reason for that. But nobody will explain that to you. No, it's truly just well, how good have you been so far kind of thing. And that's what's so frustrating for me. And so as I saw the end coming, knowing that I have a family, and knowing that I was not going to stick around and be a part of the United Methodist Church, and knowing that we could not get to a decision to leave the United Methodist Church, I made the decision to stick by my standards and my morals, and make the very tough decision of stepping away, because I just can't be a part of that anymore. I don't want someone to ever accuse me of, you're just one of those Methodists and y'all believe in this and you believe in abortion and you believe that. And I don't. I don't believe any of that stuff. And I don't want to be accused of that. We live in a world where you're either this or you're that, and you're fully that and you're fully this, and that's the message I've tried to get across to that church is you're UMC until you're not, to quote our district superintendent. Well, if that's what that means, then every time those videos pop up of drag queens in Florida and the bishops in Georgia that are picketing for gay rights, and like every time that happens, guess what? You're a part of that church, whether you realize it or not. You may not want to be. You may go, well, that's not happening here, but their initials are UMC. Just like every Republican is treated a certain way, every Democrat is treated a certain way. Every church is going to be treated the same way. And so people say, well, that's not hurting membership. I think it is. I think some people are going to realize, yeah, UMC means UMC, and it means all of UMC. Now, just like if you followed me in the booth and you see me vote, you might think I'm one kind of person. I'm a white supremacist, I'm this, I'm that, or whatever. But if you know David, you know David's not all of those things, right? The church doesn't realize that the world we live in, though. You got to make a choice and you got to be able to stick with it. And so for me, I made my decision and I'm going to stick with it. Wasn't easy, tough decision with a brand new baby and a wife that was off work for maternity leave and things like that. But, I could sleep a little bit easier knowing that I tried to do the right thing. And that I did my very best to make them all see why I was doing it. So, yeah, that's how we got here today.
Wow. All right. So there is a lot there. I have a lot of notes, but I want to make sure. I saw Josh writing some stuff down too. So do you want to introduce, is there something you got from that you like maybe wanted to clarify, Josh, or ask a question about to sort of get some more insight perhaps?
I don't think I have any clarifying questions, but I did. I took a lot of notes. I think the biggest thing that I'm walking away with, one of the biggest things is, hierarchical church structures and church polity. They're boring things until they're really, really important, right? Like it's something that a lot of people take for granted. And I come from a Baptist background as well, Dave, right? That's who I am, right? So I very much get what you're talking about with church autonomy and, congregational church government and things like that. And they have their own issues. I don't think there's a perfect system. But it is important to understand where you find yourself and how decisions are made by leadership, how they impact you as a congregant. It's boring, but I say boring, right? It's boring, but it's very, very important. And I think all too often people kind of take that for granted and don't realize what they're getting themselves into when they join a church.
Yeah. Well, and one of the things that I think it was, I don't know who knows and who doesn't, because like you said, a lot of your congregants didn't know they didn't own the building. And I know when I found, so again, I'm Wesleyan, and when I found out, I forget what it was we were trying at the previous church that I was at, we were going to move churches because the church we were in was it was getting ran down, and we wanted to build a new one and move. And then during that process, I found out that like we didn't own it. We weren't the ones that were going to sell it. We weren't the one. I was like, but we're the ones that invested all this money in the wall, in the ditch we dug outside, and all of the things around it. And then when I found out that we like nothing, like they could come tomorrow and be like, this isn't yours anymore. And I'm like, what? Yeah. So I think if you're a Wesleyan or you're a Methodist, I'd have to ask my mom and dad. My mom and dad are Free Methodist, so I don't know how that works there. But like Josh said, I think knowing your denomination's policy is incredibly important. And when it comes up is like David, when you were talking, like nobody thinks like, oh, well, that's not a huge deal until it is a huge deal, until you have to figure out like, what does this mean for us? And what could this potentially mean for us down the road? Because like you said, I mean, this is, I don't know, but 5, 6, 8 years ago, this would have even been a thought probably in some people's head about, what this looks like. And I know some of the United Methodist ministers around here that I'm talking to have thrown out numbers similar to what you're saying as far as the church buildings go, to where their congregations are, I live in a very conservative area. None of them want to stay associated with, they want to go with the, the Global Methodist Church, I think is what yeah. So, but then they've been told, well, here's X amount of dollars you got to pony up before you leave. And a lot of them they've just, all they can do is request prayer from us, just like guidance. How are we going to do this? Should we do this? And many of them, again, I live in a pretty a rural area, but it's an older area. So a lot of these people are, this is a generational church. Like we have 3-4 generations that have went through this church. And so there's a lot of sentimental value attached to it too. There's a lot of, my kids, my grandkid, like everybody was married here. And it's one of those things where I think for some people, they'd be like, well, just, tell them you're not going to pay it and go find somewhere else. But for a lot of these people, United Methodist Church is an old denomination. And I think for a lot of people, they don't realize that like, it's more than a building to them. This is a place where they've had memories. This is where people have been baptized. This is where marriages have happened. This is where their family members have gotten saved. So it's one of those things where they're just like, there's a lot of sentimental value attached to it. And then when you get a number thrown out that's enormous and you're like we've paid for everything in here and you're going to take it. I think that's one of the things that's incredibly, it's disheartening for them. And it makes the decision not harder, but a lot more difficult to part with if they're going to do that, if they don't have that money. And I don't know about your area. I know around here, a lot of the United Methodist churches that, I know of are fairly poor. Their membership isn't super high. They don't have like high giving, and they don't have a lot of savings. So they don't really have an option unless they want to take out a loan, which is just going to put them more in debt. So that's definitely one thing that I think is a really good call out that people need to realize, because like, again, depending on what denomination you're from, that's like news to you. You're like, what? Your denomination owns your building? Yeah, it does. Right. So I have a couple things. Did you have anything else, Josh?
Like I said, I got a whole bunch of notes too. If you want to grab something, feel free, and I can pipe in whenever.
Well, okay. Yeah. Well, one of the things I do want to get from you, David, after we get off of here, so I can add it in the description, are those videos you mentioned from Rob? What'd you say his name was?
Rob Renfro, Renfroe. He is from the Woodlands Church in the Woodlands, Texas, and it's a 13,000 member church that voted about 2 months ago now. They voted to disaffiliate. So that on one day in the state of Texas, the two largest United Methodist churches in the state of Texas, over 22,000 members combined, voted to leave the United Methodist Church. And so that's one of the lies, and I'm just going to call it that. You can say mistruth or whatever to make it sound better. I'm just going to cut right to it. It's a lie. One of the lies being told to a lot of smaller Methodist churches that don't have the ability to, or don't have the want to go out and research a lot of these issues on themselves, is that come 2024, it's okay. Like, we're going to have more conservative delegates that are going to vote because supposedly Africa is going to send more people over to the U.S. for the General Conference. And we know Africa, they all vote conservative, which they do. They hold to a very, very firm, old-fashioned standard, old Methodist way of doing things. So we do know that, yes, they will vote that way. One of the questions that kind of got under the skin of the district superintendent on that phone call that I mentioned earlier was, I asked him, I said, how do you quantify that? Tell me how, because that had just happened the previous weekend. I said, how do you tell me that 22,000 members left in one day in two churches? There are hundreds and thousands of other churches across the country going through disaffiliation right now. How do you come up with a number that there's going to be more conservatives at the next General Conference than there is right now? And of course, he couldn't answer that question because the answer is not. There's no way for him to do that. You can't do the math and say, okay, all the conservatives and traditionalists are leaving, but there's going to be more of them at the next General Conference than there was in 2019. That's not possible. I'm not a super smart guy. I'm not a big math guy, but it's not possible to have all these people removed from rosters of the United Methodist Church, and then there's going to be more of them just pop out of Africa some way. That's not going to happen. And so a lot of churches are just taking the line that, oh yeah, there's going to be more traditionalists than ever before at the next General Conference. I don't know if they're going to find a bigger plane to fly over there and maybe pick up random people off the side. I don't know how they're going to come to that number, but it's not possible because the delegate system is much like it is just in the delegate system in American politics. Certain pockets of areas get more delegates, and if you reduce the amount of possible delegates, well, all the members that were at that 22,000, or excuse me, that 13,000 member church, if there were 10 delegates in that church, now those 10 delegates don't exist. So now they're going to have to keep going down the list to find 10 more delegates to fill those seats. And the traditionalists are not going to be there by 2024. So how do you tell me the next general conference is going to fix all the problems? It's not. It's going to make them worse. So, yeah.
Do you think a lot of, so here's a question that pops up when you bring that up. Do you think a lot of the churches then that are disaffiliated are saying, like, even if it were to shift back, it's the writing's sort of already on the wall? Is that sort of, I mean, because that would be my thinking. My thinking would be, you've already got this far. So even if there is sort of a shift back, I already have a better option in the global United Methodist Church. So why not just go ahead and do that now? Is that sort of the thinking?
Yeah, that's the thinking. And because the Global Methodists, they launched on May 3rd. So May 3rd was their first Sunday. And the reason they did that was because the past 2 years, obviously there were various reasons with the pandemic of why there was no general conference. So in 2019, there were certain things put in place that were supposed to be voted on in 2020. They never expected for us to be in 2022 and some of these issues still be lingering. 2020, this 2019 conference, it was basically a 50-50. Nothing got resolved. People left more frustrated than they got there in St. Louis. It was a very contentious general conference, and that was a special call only to talk about the issue of human sexuality. That is the only thing that was on the table then. They called a meeting, a general conference, just to talk about it, and they did not resolve anything. And that made both sides frustrated because the bigger body said, well, we're not going to give either one of you what you want. We're just going to have to find a way to make it happen. Well, then obviously 2020 happened. We know what happened in 2020. The pandemic started. Obviously, they weren't going to convene again in 2020. 2021, they kicked the ball down the street a little bit more and said, no, we're not going to do it this year. There was supposed to be one in 2022. They came out at the beginning of this year inexplicably said, we're going to go ahead and just go. We're not even going to go for 23 now. We're going to go all the way to 24. And so what that did for the Global Methodists, the people that were already kind of talking about this is what's going to happen with the traditionals, okay, well, then there's no reason to wait, because if they're going to kick the can down the street enough to go to 2024, we see the writing on the wall. And so that's kind of what got the push. The Global Methodists have been around. The idea for that has been around for a long time, but they didn't have an incentive to go ahead and let's make it happen until they decide we're going to push off the general conference. So I would say and that's another issue with a lot of local congregations is they're not getting any answers because their pastors don't want to talk about it until there is an answer. Which 2024 for a lot of those pastors is we're going to get the answer in 24. No, 24. And this is exactly the same analogy I used when I presented and when I talked to people at my former church. 2024 is a divorce court. It is not. There's not going to be any. Both sides have said we are not reaching to the middle anymore. The traditionalists have said we are going to stay firmly on this side. The progressives have said they're going to stay firmly on that side. There are a small group that call themselves centrist. I don't know how you do that right now. You're either this or that, kind of like I mentioned earlier. I don't know how you maintain a central position on these things. But both sides have already said there will be no more concessions for either side now. Like we are firmly in one camp or the other. That the leaders of the two parties have said that. So 2024 to me is nothing but divorce court. Who gets this? Who gets that? Who gets this? I mean, are we going to, as the United Methodist Church as a whole, going to give the progressives, $100 million to go start their own denomination, and so that they don't bash the United Methodist? Or is it going to be vice versa? Would they possibly give the traditionalist, a huge sum of money to go start your own congregations and that kind of thing? So nobody knows what that looks like, unfortunately. But that's 2024 is being sold as this is going to be the fix-all. But all it's doing is leading churches to splinter more because there is no answer. There is no solution in place right now.
Gotcha. So I guess the question I have then, kind of twofold. So the Global Methodist Church then has they've like you said, they've just sort of seen it and said it's too far down. We might as well just do this now. And instead, it's better to start sort of it now than wait for them to tell us how we can start it, is sort of how I'm taking that. And then you've mentioned January a couple times in regards to like, this is the time where like they have to, like, what's January? Is that just the beginning of the church year for you guys? Is that the idea? Or
just the new church year and for church budgets and all that kind of stuff, because there's so much that goes along with if you do choose to disaffiliate and you do get a chance to get through the process fast, then there are so many things. I mean, you have to come up with a new, bylaws and church, every way the church is structured and where your leadership is going to be. Because the book of discipline is so weird about some of the things. This committee has to have so many men, so many women. It has to look this way, and every committee has. But if you're not Methodist or United Methodist anymore, you don't have to do that. So, for a lot of churches, it would just give them the benefit of being able to start anew right out the gate instead of having to change everything mid-year as far as getting your 501c3 status and all that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of law firms that have started reaching out specifically to churches going through this process. Okay, we'll help you get all your nonprofit stuff, because if you're a United Methodist Church, you all live under the same 501c3. Our 501c3 or our EIN number at the church I was at was the same EIN number of every congregation around us, or United Methodist congregation around us. So again, different than the Baptist church, where every church files for their own status and they do this, and this is an officer of the church, all that kind of stuff. You don't have to do that in the United Methodist Church. You're all just a small part of the bigger church, and you live under their protections and stuff. So, so that's kind of like why the January thing. What was the first part of the question again?
No, that was it was just about the Global Methodist Church going ahead and doing it, because I already saw the writing on the wall. So the idea you were talking about earlier, then, that there was a lot of people trying to have meetings before January, and that's why then, so that they can go ahead and get out and just start fresh, instead of having, because I'm assuming then that if you go into January still part of the UMC, you're part of the UMC until next January at least then. Is that because you're part of it because it's the year? Wow. That's, you're kind of trapped right away. So, two questions, I guess, I have for the discipline part of it, because again, I totally understand the Wesleyan Church, has the exact same sort of thing, like Article 5.4. So with all of that, does the Global Methodist Church already have, like any of that developed, or do they just kind of leave it up to the local congregation to do that?
So the Global Methodists, they have a book of discipline, so to speak, that's kind of in place right now. That they're kind of living under. They're not taking apportionments or anything like that right now at the Global Methodist Church. They have set out the formula for what they're going to ask for when that day does come. Here's what I would say, that I like our church, if we had finished the disaffiliation process and we would have decided at that point what to do next, my recommendation was not going to be to immediately go to the Global Methodist, and there's reasons for that. There's a pastor that's up the road from us that's gone through this, and he made a statement. One of my conversations with him about disaffiliation, he had finished the process. Their church is completely independent now. They are out from under the weight of the United Methodist Church, and he brought a great analogy when I was talking to him, and he said, our mentality on this was, anybody that ever gets divorced, we don't recommend they get married like the next month. Like it's probably best to kind of figure things out a little bit, figure out who you are, kind of thing. And I was like, that's it, So for me, that's part of it. The second part of it for me is all of these things in the Global Methodist that aren't nailed down yet. Now, from what I've read and all the research I've done on the leaders of this, like, I have no reason to not believe everything. But I'm pretty sure when the United Methodist Church was started, everybody would have said the same thing. They have already announced, like, okay, we're not going to announce our general conference until the UMC announces their general conference. Our book of discipline is not going to be written and finalized until we know what's getting taken out of the United Methodist book of discipline and what's going to be changed in there. So I think what the Global Methodist has a chance to do, again, I'm not saying this will happen, but this is the fear that I have, is, if you're from Indiana, you've driven in snow, I'm sure, snow and ice, like when you get in trouble in a car accident, slipping on ice, is when you try to overcorrect the spin. And you get in trouble because, oh man, now we got to overcorrect this issue. What I think the Global Methodist may be doing, again, not trying to make accusations, not saying this is that they're going to overcorrect. By them saying we're not going to put anything out until they put theirs out, you're just basically saying we're going to see how far crazy to the left they go, and then we're going to go as far crazy to the right as we can go, and we'll hope for the best, right? And so, and I shared that fear with my church, and so I told them, I said, I don't know that because you don't have to. I mean, any church that chooses to disaffiliate can choose to just maintain independent status for as long as they choose to do so. And that's what a lot of churches are doing. Some churches are voting in the very same conference that they vote to disaffiliate. Some churches are voting to join the Global Methodist Church. If that's the case, that's awesome. I know the Global Methodists are not doing the trust clause, so you'll never have to worry about this problem again of somebody else owning your building or anything like that. So there's lots of things that are going to be very similar to the United Methodist Church. But I think the push for just jump to global is kind of crazy right now in my head, because it's like you don't know really what they stand for. Everything's kind of written in sand. You know, like, okay, we say all these things, but again, if you're already publicizing, you're not going to make firm commitments on anything until after the 2024 UMC conference. You're kind of treading on, some scary areas there in my head. But
yeah, no, I like the analogy. Yeah, you don't want to jump from one crazy relationship just to the next crazy relationship just because it's available. Yeah, no, that's a great example. I like that example a lot. So, so Josh, we're closing in about 15 minutes before we stop here. I've got like one kind of last final thing. Is there anything you want to jump?
Yeah. So as I was listening to you talk initially, Dave, I just kind of wrote down, how far out do we look at issues and react to them? Right. Because you kind of mentioned like, human sexuality was kind of on the table in terms of having that conversation, and the pastor was, kind of pushing that off. And so that kind of begs the question for churches, how far out, do we try to look and see here are the issues today? What are the issues a few years down the road? And at what point do we start kind of adjusting for that? And I think oftentimes pastors and churches are hesitant to do that because they don't want to, they don't want to commit a slippery slope fallacy, or, they don't want to be a newspaper dispensationalist or whatever it could be. But really, we have to be aware of what's going on in the world and kind of looking at the trajectory and planning ahead for that. And what kind of went along with that as I was thinking about it was something else that you had mentioned was I think you were quoting the pastor or somebody had said that we won't talk about it until we have to. Mm-hmm. And I think that at that point, it's too late. If you wait until you have to have that conversation, it's too late. If you've got little kids, you kind of understand that too. Like you've got to kind of be ahead of things, and you've got to, to be able to have those conversations. And I think at some point too, you had mentioned in reference to the church, not in a negative way, but just kind of a general ignorance of how to address things.
Right.
And I think all of that kind of goes together, like those 3 points of how far out are we looking, talking about it in a timely fashion, and congregations not being ignorant of not only what's going on, but how the church and the greater hierarchy works. That falls on the shoulders very squarely of church leadership, of the pastors and elders and bishops that are leading, these institutions. I have to say, I've got a lot of respect for what you did, man. Like it took some stones, took a spine, and we're lacking in spines these days to stand up straight and say, hey, this violates my conscience, and I'm not going to do that. And this is really a watershed moment, not only in the U.S. church, but I think globally. Like you said, the divide is kind of going further, right? The right, we're sticking to it, and the left, we're sticking to it as well. And that center, what it's in there. So I guess if I were to phrase that as a question, I'm kind of just talking now. If I were to phrase that as a question, what are your thoughts on how far do we look out at things and react to them? Especially as a pastor in a church. Is it a couple of years? Like, how do you address that? And how do you minister to your church while faithfully preaching the word for things that are to come? How do you prepare people for that?
For me personally, I think in order to prepare our congregants for what is coming, we have to be preparing ourselves. I think that as a whole, not any particular church, the Church of Jesus Christ, no denomination, no book of discipline, the church severely lacks in prayer and discernment, and as you mentioned earlier, stones. They don't have. We don't have a church today that is led, for the most part, and we do have some great, strong leaders across different denominations and different bodies and that kind of thing. But as a whole, castles, I use this analogy in one of my last sermon I preached there, actually. And I didn't know it was my last sermon, but it was. Castles, and you look at castles back in medieval times, and you see, the gun turrets, and you see these towers. The four corners of a castle are the highest points, so that you could see what was coming. You look at even old-time villages and old-time, Western-type little forts and things that were built. But the highest point on the map was the four corners of because they were looking for what's coming. Because if you're constantly looking for what's coming, you get an idea of the timing of how long it will take somebody to get there. Back in medieval times, or back in when these guys are standing up in these forts and they have a gun in their hand and life is going on in the fort behind the walls like it's normal. But these guys have to tell you, we've got 6 months, or we've got, oh man, they're a week away. I can see their fires at night. They're moving in on us. We've got a week. Okay, now we've got 2 days. Now it's here. The problem is we don't have anybody doing that anymore. We have the pastors of churches that are, and I'm going to get maybe a little too passionate here. I'll try not to go too long. We have pastors of churches that are spending more time in coffee shops debating theology, and they're not standing guard at their church anymore. That is their job, or to put somebody in place that will do that wholeheartedly. And pastors are spending more time at coffee shops and listening to podcasts. No offense to podcasts, I love podcasts, but they spend all their time. That's what they spend their time doing. They are not spending their time going, God, I am the lightning rod for this body of believers. You have placed me here to be the lightning rod. What am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to say? And then whatever he tells you, you go and you do it, and you say it. And there's no pastors doing that. I mean, it's hard for pastors to do that these days because big salaries and cushy lives. It's hard to imagine if I make somebody just mad enough, I won't have this anymore. And I think there are some guys out there that still want to maintain that position, but it's just hard for them. And so churches as a whole, I have to think that you have to stand for something. I use the analogy. I use the Chick-fil-A thing. I'm a big Chick-fil-A fan, big believer in what they do and that kind of thing. And I tell people all the time, because this is the kind of like what you said, like, how do you do this? How do you have these conversations? Chick-fil-A's, the best week of sales Chick-fil-A has ever had is when Chick-fil-A dug their heels in the ground and said, we stand up for traditional marriage. Oh my gosh, we're going to boycott you. We're going to run you out of business this week. And they tried. But the people that said, man, good for you, Chick-fil-A. I'm proud of you. The biggest week of sales in the history of their company happened after they took a stand on something. And I think there's something to see in that why should a business who is fully reliant on customers to be happy, why should they have more guts than the church does? And I think the problem is that in America today, we think we have to affirm someone to love someone. And it is not the same thing. You do not have to affirm someone and affirm their bad decisions to love them. If my son kept getting speeding ticket after speeding ticket after speeding ticket after speeding ticket, I would still absolutely love him. But I'm going to tell him he's an idiot and I'm taking his keys away from him because he keeps getting speeding tickets, But we in America, and we're like, again, the church is a microcosm of society. We go, no. That if you tell him he's dumb for driving like that, it's gonna hurt his feelings. Yeah, but maybe it'll change something. And so we've got to get out of this mentality as a church. We have to affirm someone to love someone. That's not true. And that's not just about sexuality. If I had somebody that was actively shooting crack in my parking lot and I walked up on them and they were getting ready to go inside and lead a Bible study, I wouldn't let them lead the Bible study because it's still a sin, And everybody just goes, no, you just don't like homosexuals. No, it's not that. It's that if you have no repentance over your sin at all, and you continue to say you want to lead people, I'm going to take you out of that position, whatever sin it is. Yes, some of them are easy to see, obviously, but I'm still going to do what it takes to get that person out of leadership where they can't continue to hurt themselves and potentially hurt others.
Nice. All right. That's a word. That's a word right there. We're almost, we're near the end here. So I'm just going to let the last thing I was going to say go because that's a word and we're just going to leave it where it is. So David, I just want to thank you for hopping on tonight. You have been incredibly articulate in communicating sort of, what's happening within the church in a way that it was really understandable to me. At least I got that. And I think I got a little bit better grasp on it than I did before without having to do all the research you did. So thank you for that. And hopefully that has helped, someone else here as well that's watching, that's listening, that maybe had some questions about it, all that sort of stuff. Do you mind if maybe another United Methodist pastor has some questions, like reaching out to you, that sort of thing? I mean, obviously you're not there anymore. Okay. So, yep. We'll go ahead and we'll put your Instagram in the description so they can reach out to you. We'll put those videos that you were talking about from the pastor in Texas down in the description too. We'll get those from you. But other than that, man, thank you very much for coming on here. I think that was, it's helpful, I think, to a lot of people that are either going through your situation or are kind of looking down the path and seeing that coming, because we didn't get into it, and probably a good thing we didn't get into it, but there's a lot of church politics that happen there. You were saying some things there that I'm like, we're having some flashbacks to some stuff that happens in churches. And I think oftentimes the members just don't see that, and they don't realize that sometimes, not every church, but sometimes that happens and they don't even know what's going on. And there's some stuff, that's just not helpful to the local body. So anyway, all that being said, thank you for hopping on tonight. I appreciate it tremendously. It was very helpful. Incredibly, like I said, incredibly articulate in regards to what, communicating all that. So Josh, you have any last words before we hop off?
No way, man. I'm not. Nope. Like you said, that was a word. I was about ready to get this man a pulpit.
Good deal. Good deal. All right. Well, guys, thank you for tuning in. If you have not liked this video yet, what is your problem? Come on, leave the like, at least on the last part. You don't even have to like any of the rest of it. Just the last part, leave a like on. And if you're not subscribed yet, go ahead and do that. We do this every Tuesday from 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next week. See ya.
Peace.